So, welcome to the DrDoctor podcast. I'm Tom Witcher. I'm the CEO and founder of DrDoctor, and we're here today to talk about digital mental health with the team from Oxleas. So we've got London Care Record, which is all about shared care. I'm really interested in your point of clinicians still using paper. So at one end, we've got London Care Record, we've got everything being shared across organisations, and then the other hand, we have a preference that we'd really like to be writing in our pads. How is that changing with things like ambient AI and scribing?
I wondered if we were going to come on to this. So I think we're at the beginning of a very interesting time when it comes to ambient technology, or ambient scribes, or AI scribes. People seem to keep changing the names of them. We're doing a little bit of work around that. And I think we're learning a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be, like I say, a very interesting year to 18 months. The kind of core product is probably there. I think we've got a lot of work to do. This is just talking about us working with our supplier.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot of work to do to get that 5 to 10% of product features, capability that really delivers the value, right? I think we've got the basics, but I think it's, so for example, a product that doesn't mean I have to spell out my name every time I start an appointment so that the AI picks up how to spell my name, because if I don't do that, it'll spell it wrong.
Yeah.
Now, my name is in the system, right?
Yes.
It's spelled correctly. It should just pull it through from the system. So these are the little bits of friction where we talked about that theme of friction, where I think we need to understand them right at the beginning, because otherwise I don't think we're going to see. It's going to be those little, I call it aggregation. I can't think who. It's that Dave Brailsford stuff of aggregational, marginal gain.
Marginal gains, the British cycling, every little bit. Yeah.
Well, the NHS is marginal pain, right? Aggregation of marginal pain, right? All the little things in my day job as a clinician that add up. Having to put my name incorrectly into the ambient scribe summarization like 5 times because I spelt it wrong, that is marginal pain.
Yes.
Right. So we're definitely on that journey with that. I think it's going to be one of the challenges around this. And again, I think this certainly links into patient engagement, and some of the use of AI in patient engagement workflow is recognizing the value that clinicians get from writing stuff down.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, I still use a bit of paper, and I've got a notebook and a pen. When do I use that? When I want to think, right? When I want to free-form think, and I just want to kind of maybe do a mind map, or kind of just try and kind of work out some relational element between information that's kind of floating around in my head. Now, I think some of what clinicians do when they're taking that paper-based note and writing it up into the system is think. They reflect, they cogitate, they formulate whatever words we want to use, and that helps them do that. Now, if we have AI that gets to that summarization point, the danger is that we then don't recognize the need for clinicians to have time to think.
Yes.
Because at the moment we don't have to put that in the diary because it's predicated in their admin. It's a kind of secondary gain. Whereas now we might need to say, right, AI is going to take away that, but you're still going to need time to think.
Yes. And
I was going to say, just in terms of thinking about the AI and the work that James and our CCIOs have been doing along with the project team, is the reason we're working with our supplier at the moment on an AI scribe is because we're really keen that we develop a solution that integrates directly with our clinical system.
Yeah.
When you talk about grit in the system, having, and we know that there are lots of products out there. We know lots of other organisations are trying different products. But, if you're trying a product that's standalone, you've still got that grit. You've still got to get the information from the standalone product into your clinical system. And so we're really keen to get a product that works well with integrating into the clinical system, because we know otherwise a lot of information will not flow in. So I think that's really critical for us.
Yeah, we've learned that like copying and pasting as a source of human error between systems is something that we hear about in information governance sort of DATEX reports where somebody's copied and pasted it into the wrong place, and so anything anything that involves copying and pasting as a workflow from the clinical safety officer point of view is probably not that safe.
Yes, totally agreed. I mean, I find the scribe conversation fascinating because we obviously don't have a sort of horse in that race, so we get to observe it from the outside. And I'm a big advocate of agentic AI. I mean, I use it in my professional life quite a lot. Interestingly, I've found myself not using a ambient note taker in meetings. And I think it's for exactly the reason that you said, which is I've tried it lots, you know, the one that's built into Teams and Granola on my iPhone and lots of different things. And then you sort of look at the notes afterwards, you're like, yeah, that is kind of what we talked about, but I'm going to write down some other stuff that's kind of been in my head while this conversation's gone on. And I think if you get to a certain point in your professional career, whatever you're doing, your notes are not, I mean, you do, they're a memoir, don't get me wrong, like, but they are very much about like, what have I processed here? And the scribes don't help with that. I do think they're really powerful, you know, if there's a set of actions that you'd otherwise have to go and enter in the EPR through some checkboxes. I think if it can automate that for you, fantastic. But I do sort of agree that I don't think they're going to create this step change in magic productivity for us because we're people and we work in a certain way. So it's a really fascinating journey that we're going to go on with it, I think. I'm sure they have huge value, but it may appear in places we weren't expecting.
I think it's really, and this is where I think, you know, we're going to have to, my approach is we're going to have to start using these products in order to work out how to make them better. And it's things like, one of the things you can do with the product that we're trialing at the moment is at the end of the appointment, you can dictate into the same recording. Yeah. So if you wanted to kind of just sit there for 5 minutes after the appointment once the patient has left, you know, you can add, you know, this is what I was reflecting. Now, how the AI model, whatever, underneath that then handles that, I think is some of the work we've got to do. I think one of the things that clinicians and clinical leaders need to really understand is prompt engineering. Like, to me, prompt engineering and how you manage that systematically and systemically as an organization is key. Right? It's almost the gap between policy and reality. In an AI-enabled workflow, prompt engineering is the gap between policy and reality.
It really is, and it's moving so fast. You know, we've built some agentic AI stuff around voice. So an inbound phone line where you can ring up and say, I want to change my appointment, and it can do that for you. Is one of the products we're gonna launch shortly, and we should definitely talk about that because I think that's exciting. And that being able to do as things like checking that patient's needs, and do they need a translator, and do they need transport? Maybe one day they might fill out a form, although we're going to very much park that for now. But, you know, all of that sort of pre-appointment work, we think an AI could do really effectively. And what we're learning is stuff that we used to write as code, we're now writing in prompts, which is remarkable. And it totally changes the time to value. You can get to value so much more quickly because you're not having to rewrite the underlying code base. You're extending, and you end up with these prompts which are hugely long and hugely detailed, but incredibly powerful. And I think the whole world is learning that at pace. It is the bleeding edge, and I think we're gonna learn a lot about how these deterministic systems work over the next couple of years. So I agree.
And there's a really interesting analogy between which some listeners may be familiar with around overfitting in AI models, right? So when it comes to prompt engineering, so let's think about we've got, it's interesting thinking about, you know, that kind of concept of overfitting in terms of general digital transformation. If we overfit a piece of technology, both at a technical level and a kind of prompt level, a kind of specification level to a particular team, it then becomes much more difficult to generalize, right? So there's a huge parallel between the kind of process of developing AI models and also then the kind of adoption of technology around in terms of that concept of overfitting.
Yeah, totally. And it will probably come back to a load of cultural change.
Absolutely.
And can we give people enough control, enough granularity to suit their service whilst keeping it controlled and giving them, so everything comes back to people, really, doesn't it? Okay, so we've talked about AI and scribes, and I'm sure we could talk about it forever. Where do we think this is going? So Oxleas has been at the lead of digital mental health transformation for the last 10 plus years more. How's this going to play out? So give us your 5 and 10 year projection of what it's going to look like to be running a mental health organisation in London in 2035.
I mean, I certainly think, we mentioned earlier automation. I certainly think in terms of the standard practices that we we have administrative staff taking referral information one system, putting it into another. We have staff booking appointments. I think that task shift we call, moving to patients being able to book their own appointments, being able to deal with referrals coming into the organisation in a much more automated way. Yeah. That's certainly an area where we want to focus on, because we think there are huge opportunities. But that whole kind of task shift to the patient, thinking about how wearables, for example, yes, information you've just got on your smartwatch could be used in terms of some of the care that we provide, thinking about how we change our pathways. We talked earlier about the work that we've been starting to consider with our adult community mental health services, thinking about, if we could think from scratch about how we would design these services, how would they look? You could see the traditional face-to-face pathway, but hopefully you'll see in the future more digital pathways where appropriate, but also those hybrid pathways as well, and digital being an additional interaction, so that while some of your care might be done remotely, some of it might be done face-to-face, you perhaps have more interaction with your patient, with your clinician, and it is more personalised to you as an individual, because we have much more information about you. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the grand vision. I mean, I think there are lots of steps to get there. Yeah. We used to draw the analogy of online banking. In the UK, we haven't just moved from, face-to-face banking to online banking. You kind of went through telephone banking in the interim. And so there have been steps along that pathway. And I think it's very much the same with healthcare. There are many different steps that we will go through along the way. But certainly I think there are lots of opportunities to do things differently.
It's a journey, isn't it? It really is.
I mean, I think, I'm one of my sort of favourite sort of ways of conceptualising this. There's 2 ways I would conceptualise it. One is, at the moment, we've got, which links back to the previous conversation about AI scribes, we've got a seesaw in the clinician's mind. On one side is the innovation, on the other side is the burden of existing workflow. Yeah. So for me, I guess over the next few years, what we've got to do is try and look at the technologies and processes and transformations that take that burden of existing workflow off that kind of one side of that seesaw, so that when we put that more innovative stuff, the virtual reality, and I'm a big fan of virtual reality, those kind of other innovative ways of working, actually they make a difference, because the seesaw isn't weighted down on one side, it can start to tip the other way. So I think we've got that challenge of, for me, next 2 or 3 years, focusing on logistics, focusing on improving workflow, AI automation where we can, AI scribes where we can, even if it just gives us 20-30%, free time back up. We've then got that, as clinicians, we've got more time, more headspace to engage with things like virtual reality, with AI, chatbots or whatever it might be from a therapeutic point of view. So I think, and it's going to be that combinatorial innovation that's going to change the kind of pathways. But at the heart of it has to be that user-centered design approach of, let's take that systemic view of the pathway, rather than kind of hanging these kind of technologies on something. The analogy I always use is the wilting Christmas tree, right? Like the baubles on the wilting Christmas tree. Yeah,
the platform's got to be strong, hasn't it?
Yeah. And I think, again, the way that we've been looking at it in the organisation is there is absolutely that digital pathway, the vertical approach, start to finish, but also there's thinking about all of the different areas of the pathway. So the referrals, if we could automate the referral process in our organisation, that impacts not just mental health, it will impact community. Yes. And there's application even within our prisons with GP referrals into healthcare from prisoners. So, we can do things there. We could do things with the appointments. We can automate appointments. We can enable patients to book their own appointments where appropriate. with AI, thinking about how we capture that clinical content. If the AI scribes work well, we could see that working in many different settings across the organisation. So it's taking some good ideas and making sure that they're standardised across the setting, but also thinking about how can we really change pathways from the start to the finish.
Yeah, the mix of like standardisation and customisation is important.
Yeah.
I really agree with the point about the sort of virtuous cycle as well. It's so apparent that once you do start getting a bit of activation energy around this stuff, which I think we have got at Oxleas around the letters, if you can keep building on it, and you've got to have, I think you always have to have there's an operational reason to do the change, there's a financial reason to do the change, and there's a clinical reason to do the change. And if you can keep ticking those boxes, even if it's only little small bits, it does begin to set up that really positive virtuous cycle, and you can create much greater change. I think the interesting point, and we sort of half touched on this earlier, and I'm very interested in it, is the risk-reward balance. Because, when you start to describe that sort of 10-year vision, I think most people sat around in a living room like this would go, yeah, I think that's right. I think that's where we need to get to. And there's probably more we can do around wearables and virtual reality, etc. How do we unlock, or how do we give permission for people to take a bit more risk around this? I think that's the key, isn't it?
I think it depends on whose risk you're talking about. So I think there's finance colleagues taking a risk, there's clinical managerial colleagues taking a risk, and then there's kind of clinicians taking a risk. And I think each of those groups will have different views on. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the consequence of failure.
Yeah.
So how do you minimize the consequence of failure? Now, you can do that by starting small, right? By going, we're not going to go like jump 2 foot into the swimming pool and kind of, into the deep end. We're going to kind of, and that's what we've done with digital letters. We've kind of recalibrated, and we've gone into the shallow end of the swimming pool, right? With a view that we're going to get to the deep end. Now, some of that is about, some of your ability to tolerate risk as an organization is about your agility.
Yes.
Now, what drives your agility is feedback loops.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right? So my analogy is your nervous system. If you can't feel your hand, like you can't feel where, the nerves in your hand, for whatever reason you've got, nerve damage in your hand, which means you don't feel when it's too hot, too cold.
Yeah.
And this happens. People put their hand too close to a fire, they get burnt, right? Because they didn't feel the fire, right? So as an organization, if you can immediately sense when you are approaching danger and be agile enough to pull away, not pull all the way away, but just move your hand a bit slightly further away from the fire, then you can calibrate, you can respond a bit more with a bit more agility. Now, I think one of the things we as an organization are, I suppose, continuing to evolve is that nervous system. And some of that's data driven. Yeah. And some of that's about clinicians filling in DATEX forms and telling us when things go wrong and not reporting it, if you see what I mean, but helping us see those near misses. Yeah. Right. And some of that's about feedback mechanisms in terms of meetings and understanding those processes. So I think our ability as an organization to take risk, at least from a change point of view, is about that agility, having that nervous system so we can detect when we're heading in the right direction and maybe when we need to course correct.
And it is interesting, isn't it, how often, as you say, you sort of putting your hand a bit closer to the fire, the risk of that is enough to stop a whole program. Yeah. Sometimes people will say, no, we can't do that because there's a risk of one thing going wrong. Yeah. And I find it really interesting how the system is configured around, quite rightly, like, there are certain things that you want never to happen in an organization. And so we put all our effort into stopping those. Meanwhile, there's huge systemic risk not being managed because it's big and hard to sort of quantify. And the risk of not changing is often much greater than the risk of changing. Really, really hard, I think, for NHS boards and governance to try and capture that sort of risk, I think, and therefore enable the sort of change that's required along with the feedback loops, etc.
But I don't think a lot of what we're talking about here is particularly risky. I mean, when you get into the realms of AI, absolutely, maybe there, we've been putting some quite good governance around thinking around the AI scribe that we are looking at the moment.
Yeah.
And, into the future, you could see digital triage, AI being used there.
Yeah.
And obviously, you'd need to make sure you've got the right guardrails. But a lot of what we're talking about in terms of digital transformation is not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's not particularly tricky. It's not particularly risky, but it's that cultural change that needs to happen in the organisation to make sure it's adopted fully.
I think the other thing I would say is part of the risk conversation is also the past was not a risk-free pleasant land of everyone. There are risks around doing things on paper. That's why we went down the electronic route, electronic record route 20 years ago, because as a clinician, you would turn up to a clinic and you couldn't find the file because some other team had taken the file and left it in their office and locked the office and you couldn't get to it. So, which never happens now because we have a 24/7 available electronic record anywhere. And, and I can see everyone's notes in that, and it's certainly improved. So I think, and we look at letters, people don't get their letters if we send them via post.
Yeah.
Right? They get lost. They get delivered to the wrong place. So I think there's also something about, from a change point of view, amplifying the risks of continuing to do business as we do it now.
Yeah.
And I think there are certainly pockets of the organization and the system who don't recognize the problem of continuing to do business as we're doing it now.
Yeah.
And therefore the kind of risk of doing anything different it feels sort of unmanageable in that sense. So I think risk balancing is part of that risk conversation. I think the other thing is about which is that kind of consequence of failure is one of the things, and Alison will laugh at me because I constantly go on about this stuff, which is about simulation, right? So if my analogy is asking a NASA astronaut to try out a piece of technology for the first time in space.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They don't do that, do they?
No.
They spend weeks, months, years developing it in simulation-based scenarios. They have a massive swimming pool tank thing called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. Now, we have nothing like the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, but we actually are, in Oxley, starting to do a lot more around simulation.
Really?
We've got a whole group of sort of community of interest, but also starting to invest in kind of our ability to kind of run simulation-based exercises. And other NHS organisations have that. So let's experiment in those kind of safe spaces so people can. And it comes down to things like clinicians practicing the way that they can talk about technology, which means they're not left with difficulty finding the right words.
Yes.
So very few clinicians working now were trained in their university or whatever course education to explain AI to a patient.
No.
Right? So we've got this whole retrofitting process we've got to do.
Yeah.
You've got a whole new language to talk about with a patient, right? We can't just expect people to pick that up on the fly.
No.
To be the spaceman in space and go, here you go. Go out there into the vacuum of space and try it out. Because the fear of failure, the fear of saying something silly that then gets them reported to their relevant, GMC or whoever is real, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Perhaps that is something we should be doing, is providing a lot more support to people as to the language and usage of these things, because it is moving so fast. It's not just if you're a clinician, it's pretty much whoever you are, whatever you do, these things are very much changing the way that we work. So with all of that in mind, we need to begin to wrap up. What gives you hope in terms of technology, and what advice would you both give any sort of NHS execs or clinicians, or actually indeed innovators who are looking to sort of start this journey? How do we make this happen together?
What gives me hope? I think certainly, I see real interest now in our organisation and, in other organisations in South East London about how we can do more with digital. I think the health plans really helped, to be honest.
Yep.
I think it's certainly amplified the conversation around digital in our organisation.
Yep.
And I think there is so much that we can do that is relatively easy in terms of making that step change to using more digital tools and making care easier for patients. But I think it's that personalisation of care that I'm really interested in, about how we can make sure that we can use digital or face-to-face or other means in terms of providing more personalised care to our patients as individuals.
Yeah, that's exciting, isn't it? A personalised NHS powered by a consistent platform would be an amazing thing. But you, James, what's your message of hope and
message of hope? Channel my inner Obama. So I think for me, the hope comes from good conversation. So I think one of the things we need to continue to do as an organization is talk to other organizations, talk to our partners, have conversation, because so often I think in the past we've ended up solving the same problem multiple times because we haven't talked to each other enough. So, I think spending time, and we do this in London a lot in terms of hearing from our neighbouring trusts in London what they're up to. We talk about patient engagement, we talk about AI scribes a lot so that we can learn from each other. So I think there's hope in that, and I think we are getting better at that. And I think digital is playing a role in that. Team meetings, video calls, WhatsApp channels, it all allows us to be a little bit more real time, in terms of certainly in the mental health CCIO community, we've got an active, and I think this is true in other like the CIO community as well. If someone's got a problem, they post it on the group. Within half an hour, they've got like 10 responses.
Really? Yeah, that's great.
Those are the sort of things that I think gives me hope. I think from a technology point of view, I think we are getting to a point where we're moving towards really usable technology from a front end user point of view. It's, you've seen to me, that's part of what's made the difference with ChatGPT and those models. We've had large language models for a long time, but now we've got an interface that creates meaningful content for the end user. And I think that's what we'll see. Now, what I'm excited about is that next level personalization. And I can't remember, one of my sort of, perhaps sci-fi hopes is that we stop talking about letters.
Yes.
Right?
I would love that too, ironically. I really would.
But so what I would like is that, someone logs into their patient engagement platform and they get to choose how they interact with their patient data. Now, if they want Gandalf to read them their latest blood results or their letter from, quote unquote, letter from their psychiatrist or other healthcare professional, then let them have Gandalf read them. Because if that means they listen and engage, great stuff. Yeah. And maybe it's trivial, maybe it's a bit of fun, but like that's what keeps people engaged.
It does. I completely agree with that. Like, I think that the letter surviving as a paradigm through all of this actually makes me laugh, to be honest. It should be structured data that the patient can access in the way that suits them.
Yeah.
And I actually think that at the real core of it, it goes right back to something that you said at the beginning, which is we've got to let go of some of the paternalistic aspects of this. We've got to let the patient choose what suits them. Maybe they want a letter, maybe they want a WhatsApp, maybe they want an avatar reading it out to them. It doesn't matter. As long as they get what they need from that information and then they have a really good consultation, then I think we've all succeeded. I've actually got an interesting... So we've both talked about personalisation there. Do we think that is possible on the EPRs and the tech landscape as we have it? Or are we going to end up in a world where there's another slice of digitisation we haven't seen yet? Is there a post-EHR piece of technology that's going to bring this all together?
Is there? Yeah, I mean, potentially, yeah. I mean, I think, some of what we're thinking, what you're discussing there, and I think some of that technology is available. It's turning text, isn't it, into structured notes.
Yeah.
I think about my 17-year-old daughter who loves a voice note. Does she want to interact with the questionnaire? Write, email? Oh my God, no, she doesn't. But she'd happily provide information in a voice note. We just need to be able to take that information and structure that into the clinical record. Totally. So I think that's important.
So I think, absolutely. I think, and I don't think many. So when you're interacting with a chatbot, actually probably what you're interacting with is 5 or 6 different agents who do different things, right? And I think if we take that analogy, I think what we've got these different systems, and what I think there probably will be augmented by AI, that kind of interface on top. Okay. That means that you can interact with those different systems. Now, that what then ends up happening to those systems over time, I think, is an interesting conversation. I don't know. I think it will depend on a number of factors, but I definitely think we'll start to move towards that kind of single user interface underpinned by agentic, AI-enabled systems where, they've sorted out all the APIs. In terms of that, large language models talking to each other.
Yeah, definitely.
There is some sort of future here that none of us quite know what it looks like yet.
We can really articulate that.
But I certainly agree. I think so much groundwork's been laid for a bigger step to happen, which hopefully will free up clinicians to focus on patients and for patients to feel like they're empowered in their care. Okay, so we've talked about personalisation extensively. I couldn't agree more. I think that is one of the huge things about technology, is it can give patients a personalised journey. Talked a lot about grit in the system. How do we remove the grit? Whether it's through really well-designed products, whether it's through bringing the patients into the room, or actually, I think whether it's the cultural change. I think that's the secret of really good cultural change, is it removes the bits of grit, the things that people don't always say, bit by bit, and brings them on the journey. And I believe so much that the organisations that succeed here are the ones that understand that. And we've talked quite a lot about how AI and all these technologies are going to come together to change the future. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you so much, James. Have you got any final thoughts to end us on before we close down today?
I'm sure James has.
I suppose for me, the missing piece so far is design, and I think if there was, if we all could just be a little bit more design literate, I think that would help a lot. And maybe I'll just leave it there.
The power of bringing the designer into the room. I completely agree. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been fascinating. There's never been more need for digital in mental health services, and to talk to two people that are innovating so much and are so thoughtful about how we get there has been a real privilege. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.